Hey, everybody. Welcome to DouglasNow.com's Beyond the Front Page with Robert Preston Jr. I am Robert Preston Jr. A couple of things I want to talk about today. Gonna do things a little differently than we have been doing in the past. The first few shows we did, we spent a lot of time talking about the top stories from the previous week, stories that, maybe talking a little bit more about these particular stories and what you might get on just looking at the stories on the website or on the Facebook page. But what I want to do today, I want to take two particular stories in general, or in particular, and talk a little more about those. One we've covered recently, one not so recently, but there's a lot of discussion about it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to narrow our focus a little bit today and kind of streamline our discussion about a couple of things, and we're going to meander a little bit with our discussion. And what I hope that we accomplish today is I want people to understand. I want you to understand why we cover the stories that we cover and in the manner in which we cover them and what the outcome would be, because there are some outcomes I would like to see. One thing I think is worth mentioning is that last week we celebrated our eighth birthday, and I didn't say anything about this on Facebook. It kind of snuck up on me and passed because it shouldn't be as late in the month of June as it is. I'm still thinking it ought to be about June the 5th. But here we are at the end of June, and goodness gracious, July 4th will be on us here in a couple of weeks. And after that, we'll be in the short rows with summer. We'll be back in school before long. So I want to think about all that. I don't want to get into all that. But our first day as DouglasNow.com, our first day online, our first day live was June 15th of 2014. Now, it doesn't seem like it's been 8 years. I would just say it doesn't seem like we're already at the end of June. It also doesn't seem like that we'd started Douglas Now 8 years ago, but we did. And we've obviously covered a lot of stories, seen a lot of things happen, been on the front lines for a lot of stuff in Douglas and Coffee County. And there's some outcomes that I would like to see. There's some things that I think need to happen that haven't happened. And that it does affect the way in which we cover the news. So, with that said, I want to get to our first story of this particular edition. Saturday night, three individuals from Coffee County were shot on the way home from a party in Lanier County. And I don't know if it was in Lakeland itself or just somewhere out in the county in Lanier County, but over in Lakeland, Lanier County, there was a party going on, and there were several individuals from Coffee County over there. On the way home, one vehicle with unknown occupants at this time, at the time that we're taping this, fired a gun into another vehicle occupied by three individuals from Coffee County. Those individuals were Savion McCray, Tremaine Newton, and Takevion Stozier. Unfortunately, Mr. McCray did not survive the shooting. All three were hit by bullets. All three were shot. Mr. McCray did not survive. He was a 2021 student or graduate of Coffee High School. And my wife, who has been a teacher for 20 years in the Coffee County school system, taught him at Eastside Elementary School. To the best of her knowledge, and this is what we woke up to Sunday morning, to the best of her knowledge, he is the first student that she has taught who died violently. All right. And she and several of her friends, they all taught together and taught the same group of students, the same cluster of students, had a hard time with this on Sunday. Sunday was not an easy day for Mr. McCray's teachers. I mean, obviously, it was not an easy day for his friends and his family either. But the point here is that Mr. McCray had a future and was a very good kid. I talked to several former teachers of his all the way up through high school, and they all said the same thing. They never saw this coming. They never saw him this happening to him. Just never did. So that's been tough. We did a story about it on Douglas Now, and again, we put a story up fairly quickly, and we always run uh, into some questions with how quickly we put stories up. Some people think that it's just simply to get clicks, that we get money off of clicks and we get paid off. That's not what happens. All right. We are a news outlet, and we want to post stories that people are talking about. And when you start seeing social media posts, you start seeing friends and family putting pictures up and writing tributes, then people begin to start asking us, well, do you know what happened? Why don't you have a story up? Well, yes, we do know what happened. We're trying to be respectful to friends and family. But then we have people asking us, well, people are talking about it. People want to know what went on. People want to know what's happening next. Were arrests made? What is there anything that the community needs to know or the community can do to help? So we try to cover what people are talking about. And you've got at the time that we wrote our story, there were a number of tributes already out on social media. So it's not like people didn't know about it. And we made some phone calls and we spoke to several different official sources. And that's where our information comes from on these stories. I'm not going to pull information off of Facebook. I'm not going to pull information from friends or family who may not always get it right. There's so many different stories that go on and that get told, and so much different information around incidents like this, particularly in the first few hours afterwards. I want to make sure that we're getting our information from official sources. That way, if there is some discrepancy in what happened, we can fall back on the fact that we got information from official sources. And there were a couple of discrepancies in our initial report. At first, we heard that Mr. Newton was not shot, but then we found out later that he was. But again, this came from official sources. So we had to edit our story and get the information correct. And that's always the battle that we wage. You want to get things out when people are talking about it. You want to let people know what's going on, but you also have to make sure that the information is correct. And, we write stories. Sometimes we didn't in this case, but sometimes we write stories off of 911 calls. And a lot of times, what is initially reported on a 911 call is not what happened at all. It's something totally different. So we have to balance that as well. But I can assure you that we do the very best that we can to make sure that we get information right. And that's one of the things that I've always tried to do. One of the things that we will always continue to do is to make sure, to the best of our ability, we get the information right. It's not always going to happen. It's not always going to happen, but we do our due diligence to make sure that we do get it right. And I was very, very uneasy about publishing the story about Mr. McCray. This is what I try to tell people. Okay. We don't make these stories up. We don't make them up. A lot of people ask us why we put the information that we do in the stories. Most of what we publish, again, comes from official sources or it comes from incident reports. And if you've never read an incident report, there's a lot of stuff in the incident reports that is pretty interesting. We don't make the information up. We pull these stories from incident reports, court records, eyewitnesses, official investigators. That's where our information comes from. And there's a lot of information that goes in these stories that's not pretty. And we don't put it out there to simply get clicks or to make people look bad. The information that we put in our stories is a part of the narrative. And these narratives are not, a lot of times, are not nice and tidy and pretty. Okay. One of the things that we kind of took a beating for over the weekend was Mr. Stozier was I think the individual of the one of the three who was the least injured. Well, that's not really the right way to put it, but his injuries were less severe than anyone else's. In the process of of investigating the shooting and looking at everybody involved, officers found that Mr. Stozier had warrants, active warrants for his arrest. And after he was treated, they took him into custody. Now, we got in trouble for that. People wanted to make comments. Why did you put that information in there? It's a part of the story. All right. It's a part of the story. And it also, like it or not, and a lot of people won't, it frames the backdrop to some degree of what happened and why it happened. And I don't I want everybody to succeed. I want all of our businesses to succeed. I want all of our young people to succeed. I want everybody in Douglas and Coffee County to do well. I do not want to see anyone in any kind of trouble. All right. I don't want to make anybody look bad. But what typically happens whenever anybody gets in trouble, it doesn't matter what it is, when people get into trouble, the unfortunate reality is a lot of times they do things to themselves, and then it's left up to us to piece the story together. I feel like I need to say it again. We don't make these stories up. We don't interject this information in there. What we put in our stories is a part of what happened. And a lot of times what happens is ugly. It's ugly. And it breaks my heart to write stories like this, where a young man graduated from high school 1 year out of school, has lost his life tragically like this. And as of right now, as of taping this show, nobody's been arrested. And I can imagine how this investigation is going. I would imagine that most people, most of the friends of Mr. McCray, Mr. Newton, and Mr. Stozier know exactly who did it, or can put officers on the trail of finding out who did it. It's not a secret. It's not a secret. But are the survivors and are those close to the survivors going to do that? One of the problems we have in Coffee County is victims and friends of victims and family members of victims don't let officers know what went on. It's crazy how there can be a shooting in a large group of people or with a number of people around and nobody ever sees anything. That happens a lot, wink, wink. It didn't happen necessarily in this case because there weren't a large group of people around. It was a shooting from one vehicle to another. Don't know how many people were in the vehicle from whence the shots came, but we know there were 3 in the other vehicle. So it wasn't a large group, but there are multiple people around. They know what went on. Are they going to tell? Are they going to give officers information to make the arrest to get these individuals off of the street? Or is it going to be a situation where nobody saw anything and we wait on retaliation to take care of what comes next? One person on the Facebook comments kept using the word messy. A couple people did, that Douglas Now was messy with the stories that we write. And what I'm thinking is there's, it is a messy story. And there's a lot of messiness in Douglas and Coffee County. But pointing the finger of messiness, if you will, at Douglas Now for something like this, you're missing the problem. You're missing the mark. All right. We've got a lot of bad stuff going on in Douglas and Coffee County. What I have hoped over the years is that with the stories and people are noticing, we're seeing it in the comments. We're seeing it. I'm seeing it in conversations I have with people every day. It's the Wild West in Douglas and Coffee County. What's going on? What's happening? Again, let me state this. We don't make these stories up. These are things that are happening in our community. So why can't we stop it? Why can't we stop it? 8 years in, why can't we stop it? And quite frankly, a lot of our leadership has let us down. I take a look at what people are discussing, what people go before our government meetings, what people get fired up about. And it's not those factors, it's not those issues that are harming our kids. It's other stuff. It's things that don't matter. It's issues that leaders think they can get a name for themselves discussing, or that they can get some financial gain down the road from. It's not getting involved in the lives of these kids. It's not addressing the problems that these kids face that put them in harm's way. If you're going to get involved and truly make a difference in any community, it doesn't have to be just Douglas and Coffee County, any community, you're going to put yourself in harm's way. You're going to make people mad, because there are a lot of people who benefit and who make a lot of money off of the misfortune and the unfortunate circumstances of others. So there are people who want to put others in these unfortunate circumstances so that they can benefit. And ultimately, if you get involved, you're going to cost these individuals money. And that's going to put you, whoever you happens to be, in the crosshairs. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that. We've been talking about this. I've gotten in more trouble with leaders across the board. All right. When I talk about these types of issues, because in a lot of ways, we want to look at law enforcement. Well, law enforcement ought to go in and arrest these folks and run the drugs and the crime out of our community. Yeah, law enforcement ought to. I'm going to say two things that are seemingly contradictory here, but I'll explain why they're not. One, I think in some ways, and this goes back nearly a decade, I think in some ways, our law enforcement community at all levels has let us down. I don't think that we have done a good enough job as a community making it difficult for drug dealers to ply their trade in Douglas and Coffee County. Now, on the other hand, I also don't think that law enforcement has gotten the help that they need from the community to help get rid of these individuals. Every law enforcement agency I can think of has a see something, say something campaign. We see it in our press releases. A lot of them will end. A lot of press releases will end. Remember, if you see something, say something. Well, we're not saying anything. We're not saying anything. So I think that, and I wish that our law enforcement community would understand the relationship. If they do, they don't ever say anything about this, but would understand the relationship between a prosperous community, between jobs, between economic development, between safe, effective schools, and a safe community. We were actually earlier today, we were in the office talking about some things that go on in some of our local businesses and industries. And there's a lot of bad stuff that goes on in our workplaces around town. And one of the reasons why is because if a lot of these employers were as strict as they used to be in their hiring practices, they wouldn't be able to have a workforce. So they tolerate things that they wouldn't otherwise tolerate in order to make sure that they have people who just show up for work. I wish that wasn't an issue. I wish that we didn't have to worry about that. I wish that it wasn't a constant battle with people using drugs at the workplace, but it happens because it's so prevalent in Douglas and Coffee County. I wish that everybody could get on the same page. I wish our community leaders, those who are in charge of the nonprofits and the 501c3s, would truly get down in the trenches. I wish that we would get the support that we need from the other agencies around to make this a difficult place for criminals to do what it is that they do. It's a paradox, and it's an interesting paradox, one I'd like to look at a little bit more closely. But we have entered a time of growth and expansion in Douglas Coffee County, rivaled only by that maybe of the mid 80s. You take a look, and we've mentioned this a little bit. You take a look at what's happening here with the shopping center downtown. All right. With some of the other building projects there. Where you ride around town, if you don't see new buildings, you see new buildings under construction, new buildings under renovation. You give it a couple of years, it already looks like a different community. You give it a couple of years, and it's going to be a very different looking community. When we get Highway 32 4-lane west of Douglas, that's going to be a game changer. That's going to be a game changer. The Douglas Square Shopping Center, a game changer. When Publix gets here, a real game changer. And there's still businesses coming in. There are businesses yet to be announced that are coming in because of what Publix is doing. These things don't happen in a vacuum. All right. You've got Pilgrim's Pride investing $75 million in improvements over at the existing plant and then building a new facility here in Douglas and Coffee County. That's a little bit controversial because people are a little bit worried about some of the external factors that may come with this rendering plant. But it was 12 years ago last week that Pilgrim's Pride came back to Douglas. And we see the difference that it makes. It's not the most glamorous industry out there. It's not. All right. But it is one of our most important. And our community, when Pilgrim's Pride was gone, our community suffered. Our community suffered. And now they're fixing to invest $75 million here in our town, in our county. And there also been a lot of other improvements in the infrastructure, water and what have you, because of Pilgrim's Pride. And we've talked about that too, that one of the big issues moving forward in Douglas and Coffee County is going to be our infrastructure and our water, sewer, utilities, and that kind of thing, because we're just about maxed out. You continue to grow, you're going to have a greater capacity and a greater output. That's going to be a major issue moving forward. But on the one hand, we had this tremendous growth and so many positive things happening. But on the other hand, we have a very bleak undercurrent, all right, of drugs, meth, heroin, violent crime. I don't know if you've noticed on Douglas Now the last couple of weeks, we've had a lot of stories about burglaries and armed robberies. We haven't always done a lot on that, but those go hand in hand with these particular types of drugs and drug crimes that are out there. All right. And I was looking. I tried to do a quick search before we came on today, and I didn't have time to look at it. But I would like to know over the last 8 years, how many young people have been killed in our community. And every time something happens, almost every time something happens, we'll get some comments, and we'll, some people will want to stand up and make statements, but it never gets below the surface. And that's what it's going to take. And that's what I want to see. And it absolutely hurts my heart that these things are happening here. And it's not going to change until people truly get fed up with what's going on. What I would really like to say, I mean, I was thinking about this on the way up to the studio today. And I'm thinking that probably the best group would be the group affected the most, young people. And a lot of times we don't give our young people enough credit, but I would love to see some young folks get upset and get mobilized. I'm tired of watching my friends die and go to prison. I'm tired of watching our families destroyed. I'm tired of watching people, my peers, with a bright future ahead of them end up floundering in the state penal system or worse. The only way things are truly going to change is when people who have something invested in what's going on will make the changes themselves. And that's really what I would like to see. I wish young people would get mobilized because the adults are letting our young people down. And that's just the bottom line. Adults in our community have let our youth down, and they're the ones paying the price. And I would very much like to see that change. So within the backdrop of some of these violent crimes that have happened, that's how I feel. That's how I feel. And it goes beyond any type of barrier that we put up. It affects everybody. And our kids deserve an opportunity to be successful. They deserve an opportunity to make the most of the gifts that they have. And in a lot of cases, that's not happening. And it is indeed a tragedy. That brings us to a close of our first segment. Got a couple of things I want to get to after we come back, but we need to take a break and hear from our sponsors. We appreciate our sponsors very much for making our Beyond the Front Page possible. Without them, we could not do it. So we're going to take a quick break and pay a couple of bills, and then we'll be back in just a second.
So I'm 12 years old. My dad buys a hardware store. Dad worked really hard. He worked 3 jobs. He taught high school science, he ran the hardware store, and he sold insurance at night. Dad's work ethic and honesty has made a big impact on me as an advisor. We learned the value of money. We learned what money could do. Working in that store, we learned what money meant to people. Being a breadwinner, taking care of family, providing a roof over our heads. You know, we worked all these years to get to this place called retirement. And whether you like to fish, golf, go to restaurants, play with the grandkids, travel, a good solid retirement income plan can help you do the things that you want to do. It allows you to retire with confidence. And at Story Wealth Management Group, we work with people in retirement and before retirement. We don't know what to expect in retirement. You've never done it before. But we've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people over the last 25 years to help with that new reality called retirement. At Story Wealth Management Group, we work hard to make sure we address all the issues that may come up to help make sure that you reach your goals. Thank you for allowing me to share my story. But it's not about me. It's about your future. It's about your family. It's about your story.
Welcome back to DouglasNow.com's Beyond the Front Page with Robert Preston Jr. I am Robert Preston Jr. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about something that's been in the news about Douglas and Coffee County. And I think this is kind of interesting. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I think there are a couple of things worth discussing about this particular issue. If you have followed some of the headlines that have Coffee County front and center on a couple of issues throughout the nation, you're familiar with an ongoing election controversy from 2020. All right. And there have been several stories in national media outlets about this particular issue. We haven't done any original stories on it. We have posted links to a couple of the other stories that have been published. And I tell people, when you're dealing with stories like this, with the scope and the reach of this type of issue, it's beyond the resources that we have at Douglas Now. All right. What the individuals at the Daily Beast and the Washington Post have done, they take reporters. They have a huge pool of reporters from which to pull, and they take these reporters and give them the time and the resources they need to spend weeks and months tracking down leads and tracking down phone records and making open records requests and going through all this stuff to compile a picture of what happened. We don't have the luxury of doing that. everybody at DouglasNow.com wears more than one hat. We don't have time to do all this. Okay. So what we've done is printed or published links, posted links to stories other outlets have written about this particular issue. All right. And there's some interesting things that go with it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time recapping it, but I will give you maybe the 30 or 45-second recap. In the wake of the 2020 election, remember all that stuff that went on, not just in Coffee County, but nationwide about the 2020 election. In the aftermath of that election, there were some folks in our elections office who allegedly, according to these stories, invited some individuals. They are, led by it's funny. It's funny. A Republican operative named Scott Hall, who actually owns a bail bond business. I'm sure he owns other businesses, but that's what I've seen in media stories attached to his name. Invited a team of operatives led by Mr. Hall to come into our election office, gave them access to our election server to search our server for, hasn't really been said what they were looking for, I guess, trying to find some evidence of vote tampering within the server itself. and you got people all over the place going crazy about this. And of course, one side wants to make this out to be an enormous problem. Other side, nah, not that big of a deal. And of course, you can imagine where those lines are drawn. They're pretty well down partisan. The Democrats really want to see some action on this. Republicans are trying to dismiss it. It's not that big of a deal. We're just trying to make sure everything was okay with the server. Now, I am taking the stance on this particular issue that I'm not going to write any more stories or publish any more stories about this until someone gets charged, someone gets arrested, somebody gets indicted, subpoenaed, whatever. All right. You can follow these stories as they unfold and as they develop. And here's why. There's a lot of people don't know this. I've done a little bit of research on this particular issue and what it may or may not mean. Here's what's interesting is a lot of people are upset that Mr. Hall was given access to our voting server, our election server. Most people don't know this. In fact, I've not talked to anyone yet who knew this. The information on that server is free and open and accessible to anyone who wanted to see it. It's not top secret. It's not classified. It's not protected. Once the election is certified, and all this happened after the election was already tallied, once the election gets certified, the election servers, the documents related to the election are open to the public. They are public government records, just like anything else, just like an incident report or a court transcript or anything like that. All Mr. Hall had to do, if he wanted to see what was on the server, was submit an open records request, and he could take a look at it, because the only thing that should be on that server are pictures of ballots. Shouldn't be anything else on there. It's not some big, gigantic, piece of equipment that has all this classified information on it. All right. It's simply ballots. And those are open to the public after the ballot, after the election's over with. So if he'd wanted to see it, all he had to do was submit an open records request, and it would have been made available to him. Now, the question comes in with all the stuff that's going on. Why is everybody making a big deal about this? What was on the server? Okay. And these questions haven't really been answered yet. The server, according to information I learned last week, is in possession, or the Secretary of State's office has possession of this server, but can't get into it. Okay. Now, our former election supervisor has submitted several different password combinations to the Secretary of State's office to unlock that server. The Secretary of State's bunch says that they can't get into it. that it is inaccessible. So it is supposedly under lock and key right now with nobody knowing really what's on there. Now, I have a hard time believing that in the state capital, one of the largest cities in the United States, with the Georgia Institute of Technology blocks away from where this particular server is housed, that they can't find somebody to get in this thing and unlock it and see what's going on. That's something that I don't understand. But the servers at the Secretary of State's office, um, I don't. The Secretary of State's office has some interesting culpability in all of this, because for those of you who followed this as it unfolded 2 years ago, nearly 2 years ago, Secretary of State's office sent some folks down here to take a look at our server and couldn't get into it back then when the election supervisor was here. And I've always kind of wondered what their motive was for coming down, because they came down here with some folks from Dominion, the company that operates the voting machines, the owner of the technology, along with armed officers from the Secretary of State's office. They came in and took over our elections office and sat down with the server and tried to figure it out then, and they couldn't. They couldn't get into it. Now, a lot of conspiracy theorists are going to go round and round about what may or may not have happened and what may or may not be on that server. The Republicans are saying that they're trying to find evidence on the server of some type of algorithm or logarithm that would alter votes as they come in, or the ability of someone to change votes, monitor the votes as they come in and change them from a remote location. Whereas those on the left are going to say that I want to make sure that the Republicans aren't putting something in the system that would do that themselves. So it's really sort of the same conspiracy theory. And which side of the conspiracy theory are you on? Because one thing about conspiracy theories, are very hard to prove or disprove. They sort of perpetuate themselves. And whenever you disprove one part of a conspiracy theory, you can always say, yeah, well, but what if this happened? And you just end up going off on some tangent. So to me, with regard to this issue, or as for me with regard to this issue, is I am remaining an agnostic on it until I see charges, indictments, or subpoenas. If you really want to know what went on, I don't know why somebody doesn't subpoena Mr. Hall and sit him down and say, tell us what happened. Subpoena those individuals involved. Tell us what happened. That would end a lot of speculation and go a long way in trying to get to the bottom of this. I have a hard time believing there's a whole lot to it, just simply because the information on the server would have been made available, according to individuals in government who I spoke with significant knowledge of this issue, said an open records request submitted to the county would allow any individual, Mr. Hall or anybody else, to take a look at that server and see what's on it. You don't have to go through all the cloak and dagger stuff. Okay. So again, it's not protected information. It's not classified. It's not top secret. It's there for anybody to take a look at. So, as far as them being granted illegal access, it's certainly not a good look. It looks like something bad happened. The optics are pretty bad, but practically speaking, the only thing that makes it look bad, from what I understand, is the absence of an open records request. Submit an open records request, Freedom of Information Act letter, and you could take a look at it. All right. Now, if you didn't get access then, well, then you've got to ask yourself what's going on. Why, what is on the server? I'm not convinced that it is as big a deal as people are making it out to be. I will change my mind, and I can change my mind as soon as I see charges or an indictment. So, and that's kind of, if you take a look at what we do on Douglas Now, in the absence of a crime, where, as we were talking about in the first segment, a crime took place, even though there haven't been any arrests, but we reported on that particular incident. A lot of what we do, a lot of individuals we highlight are those who have been charged with crimes. All right. So there's been no charges yet. So I'm backing away from this issue. And again, this is coming from conversations with individuals who have a tremendous amount of knowledge of this situation and who are in government. I'm backing away from the issue until I see an indictment, until I see a subpoena. At that point, then we'll move forward. So once again, there are a lot of people talking, a lot of stuff going on. People don't really, I don't think, really understand exactly what's at stake here and understand exactly what's going on with these servers. And I'll say this again, that it doesn't matter what system you use, whether you use the old time, hand ballots, whether you pull the lever on the old voting machines. I do remember voting like that. Or you use computers and Dominion and all the other various systems that we've had. Elections are only as secure as the people who run them. They're only as secure as the people who run them. And you can have the most secure system ever invented, but if you've got bad people running elections, they can get around that. And we've seen that happen in a number of places throughout our country. It happens. There have been some interesting things that have happened with elections here in Coffee County going back 15, 20 years, 30 years. A lot of interesting things happen here. But it's all according to the individuals who run the elections. All right. And that's not going to change no matter what system you use. But the big revelation in all this, they want to know what happened. Just go subpoena Mr. Hall and ask him. I don't know that they haven't questioned Mr. Hall, but find him and ask him questions. Otherwise, if you want to see what's on the server, submit an open records request and take a look at it. Probably be disappointed what's on there, but we will follow it. But we're not going to give it a whole lot of press until we see subpoenas, arrests, and or indictments. Thank you guys for watching. We appreciate it very much. Have enjoyed our time we've spent here together this afternoon. We'll do it again next week. You've been watching DouglasNow.com's Beyond the Front Page with Robert Preston Jr. I am Robert Preston Jr. signing off. We'll see you next week.